So today is Palm Sunday, and traditionally I think the story told around Palm Sunday is about the crowd that joyously welcomes Jesus at the beginning of the week, is later by the end of the week crying out to crucify him. But I have to be honest, I think a closer reading of the gospel suggests that the people calling for Jesus to be crucified were not always even completely the same crowd that was welcoming Jesus, right? If we read the story of Jesus' arrest and he goes before Pilate and Herod and the Sanhedrin and all that, it's all happening in the middle of the night. It's practically dawn when Jesus is actually condemned by Pilate to be taken into the barracks and flogged some more, and before he's sent out to the cross early in the morning. So the people who have gathered to crucify Jesus, to yell for his death, is actually a smaller group. And so this story is not necessarily a story about the fickleness of the human heart or how quickly the crowd can turn away from us. But I think it is a story about how there is evil in the world and how it uses and manipulates people, and how so many people feel oppressed by it and unable to act against it. Because what's happening in Jerusalem is that Jesus is engaging in what we might call civil disobedience. Now, the Passover, which is the reason that everybody is coming to Jerusalem, as you may know, is the story of the escape of the Israelites from bondage and slavery in Egypt, right? That God has condemned the firstborn of Egypt to die in this great sort of night, and the Israelites are to mark their homes so that the angel passes over them, right? That's the story of the Passover. And in the midst of this tragedy, Israel is freed and enters into its journey to the promised land. And so the Israelites, who are now the Judeans of Jesus' time, are sorely oppressed by the Romans who have control of them. They're taxed practically into starvation, and the Romans have no respect for God or for the religion of the Israelites, and they've co-opted the people who should be the leaders, the temple priests and the royalty in the area, to their own ends. And so the people feel powerless. But Passover is this great story of liberation that lifts the hearts of the Judeans and tells them that the possibility of freedom is out there. And they know this not only from their own story, but from fairly recent history in their terms. Because just a little bit more than a century before this, a revolt led by the Maccabees had risen up and thrown out the previous foreign rulers before the Romans came, and they had enjoyed their freedom for a while, and they knew this was possible, and this is the Messiah that they've been waiting for to come and lead them in this uprising that will kick out these foreign oppressors who have dealt with them cruelly. And so because of that, the Romans were very fearful of the festival of the Passover. Because of all of these passions and all of this history, they wanted to make sure that there wasn't any trouble in the city. Now the governor, Pontius Pilate, of the area, he normally lived in a very nice palace on the beach. He lived on the Mediterranean coast. And that's where he hung out most of the time. But once a year, at the time of the Passover, him and his soldiers all marched up into Jerusalem as this great show of power to remind the Judeans that Rome was in charge. And so he would come in from the west, coming up into the hill country with his legions and their banners and their bugles, and the governor would be riding on a big war horse, and they would enter into Jerusalem from the west. And there'd be a procession, of course, to show the power of the empire. And Jesus comes in from the east, from the opposite side. And he comes not in a great war horse, but on a donkey or a little colt, a little baby horse. And he comes in not with a crowd of soldiers, but with his ragtag group of followers from Galilee and all of the crowds, the poor people, seeing in Jesus their hope of salvation made manifest. And Jesus comes in and they say, "Hail the King who comes in the name of the Lord," to make sure that the Romans know that they see the King who comes in the name of the Lord is different than the king who comes in the name of the empire. So he's engaged in this civil disobedience in order to give hope, but also to remind the Romans that there are greater powers in the world than them. It's this act, this prophetic act, making the story of the prophets come to life, making the promises of God be manifest in the lives of the people. Right? And so this story isn't necessarily about how this crowd who is so excited, who is full of hope, gives in to fear and despair by the end of the week. But it is a story about how those who seek evil work to make it happen secretly and in the dark. Sometimes while the people of hope stand idly by and don't know what to do because Jesus has so many people on his side. That surely, as he tells Pilate, if I wanted to have a revolution, I have the people to do it. That if all Jerusalem rose up, that there wouldn't be enough Roman soldiers to hold them back. And yet, they don't. And partly we know this is because human nature makes it hard for us to act in the face of such evil. That we feel powerless, we feel helpless, we feel lost and don't know what to do. And that's really what this story is about. And God knows this. God knows how the human heart works. And so when this plan is unfolding, God knows how it's going to end because he knows how people act. And they're afraid. And as Jesus is later on marched through the streets carrying his cross, or with Simon carrying the cross for part of the way, bleeding from the flogging and the torture that he's already been put through as he's taken to the place of his execution, the people in the street weep, but they don't rise up. They're too afraid. And this is the thing that Jesus came to show us, I think. That Jesus shows us that there's nothing to be afraid of. That Jesus goes to his death knowing, confident in God's promise, that his mortal death is not the end. That the resurrection awaits. Jesus goes to die in complete confidence that God will take care of him. And that's the promise that is extended to us as followers of Jesus. That we're followers of Jesus not just so we can say things about Jesus that we believe to be true, but so that we can be followers, that we go in his footsteps, that we act as he acts, that we follow the example of Jesus. And the greatest thing that Jesus gives us, or that he should be giving us if we are willing to accept it, is freedom from fear. Freedom from the fear to stand up for what's right. Freedom from the fear about speaking up when we encounter abuse, when we encounter insult, when we encounter those who would demean and deny the dignity of their fellow humans. That being a follower of Jesus means that we have nothing to be afraid of in this world. Because this world is not the sum total of our existence. That the promises of God show us that nothing in this world can keep us back from the eternal love of God and from the promise of the kingdom that awaits us. And so we are given this promise so that we might be bold in action and in love and in mercy and in grace. So that we can live into the words of our baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of every human being. And that word, every, there's no one outside of that. No one. That there are no boundaries that we can define that God pays attention to. That we are called to be the people who bring about love and mercy in this world. In the example of Jesus. Unafraid of the actions of evil. Not people who give in to fear, but people who hold on to hope. And that, I think, is the story of Palm Sunday. Amen. We'll continue now with the